There are whispers in the quiet corners of the mind, threads of thought spun from forgotten fears and whispered secrets. Sometimes, these threads weave themselves into tapestries of a life, vibrant and full. Other times, they form a suffocating shroud. And sometimes, just sometimes, they become the invisible cords that bind two souls in a dance so forbidden, so fraught with peril, that merely speaking its name feels like an act of sacrilege. Today, we're diving into one of those stories, a story about a woman named Sarah, a man named Dr. Elias Thorne, and a truth so dark, it threatened to consume them both. This isn't just about a therapist and his secret lover. It's about the shattering of trust, the unraveling of identity, and the chilling echoes of a past that refused to stay buried. Stay with us because this is a story that will pull you in, thread by agonizing thread. Sarah arrived at Dr. Thorne's office not because she was broken, not in the way the world understands brokenness. She was fragmented. Her life, on the surface, was a testament to the American dream. A picturesque suburban home, a husband who worked hard, two bright, inquisitive children. Yet, beneath the veneer of perfectly mowed lawns and predictable routines, there was a void, a silence that hummed louder than any joy, a feeling of being untethered, drifting in an ocean of unspoken anxieties. She sought therapy not for a crisis, but for a lingering, indefinable ache in her soul. Dr. Thorne was recommended by a friend, lauded as a man of profound insight, a quiet listener who possessed an almost alchemical ability to untangle the knotted threads of the human psyche. His office was exactly as one might imagine a therapist's space. Tastefully minimalist, adorned with a few abstract art pieces that seemed to shift their meaning depending on the light. The scent of aged leather and faint, herbal tea hung in the air. Dr. Thorne himself was a man of quiet authority, his silvering temples lending him an air of distinguished wisdom. His eyes, a startling shade of intelligent blue, held a depth that seemed to see right through the practiced smiles and rehearsed answers. He spoke in a low, measured tone, his voice a balm to Sarah's frayed nerves. He listened, truly listened, in a way no one ever had before. Not her busy husband, not her well-meaning friends. In that hour, once a week, for the first few months, Sarah felt seen. She felt heard, and slowly, imperceptibly, a different kind of thread began to weave itself around her. It began innocently enough, sessions extending a few minutes longer, a shared laugh that lingered a beat too long. He started offering observations that felt less like clinical analyses and more like intimate understandings of her deepest fears and desires. He'd recall a passing comment she made weeks ago, bringing it back into context with a startling accuracy that made her feel known. He was her confidant, her mirror, reflecting back a version of herself she hadn't realized was hidden. He helped her articulate the suffocating pressure of expectations, the quiet despair of a life lived for others, the slow erosion of her own identity. He was the only one who seemed to understand the specific flavor of her loneliness. And in that understanding, a dangerous seed was planted. The line between professional and personal began to blur with a subtlety that was almost insidious. It wasn't a sudden leap, but a gradual, almost imperceptible seep. A handwritten note, thinking of our conversation, slipped into her file, a recommendation for a book that seemed to speak directly to her unexpressed longings, accompanied by a casual mention that he too had found solace in its pages. He never touched her, not at first, not in the way one might imagine a transgression. But his presence, his unwavering focus, his quiet intensity, became a gravitational pull she couldn't resist. She found herself counting the hours until her next session, a flutter of anticipation in her stomach that had nothing to do with therapeutic progress and everything to do with a burgeoning, unspoken connection. One rain-swept afternoon, Sarah was recounting a particularly painful memory from her childhood, a moment of profound isolation. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. Instead of offering a clinical interpretation, Dr. Thorne simply reached across the small space between them and, with a gentle touch, offered her a tissue from the box on his table. His fingers brushed hers, and for a fleeting moment, a spark ignited. It was electric, illicit, and absolutely terrifying. She pulled her hand back as if burned, her heart thrumming against her ribs. He simply averted his gaze, cleared his throat, and continued the session as if nothing had happened. But something had. The professional barrier, once a solid wall, had just developed its first hairline fracture. The next session, the air between them was thicker, charged with an unspoken tension. He no longer offered tissues, but his eyes held a new kind of intensity when they met hers. He asked questions that delved deeper into her emotional landscape, questions that felt less about her mental well-being and more about the raw, exposed nerves of her soul. She found herself revealing things she hadn't planned, secrets she hadn't even consciously acknowledged to herself. And he absorbed it all, his gaze unwavering, a silent promise of understanding. That hour became less about healing and more about confession, about unburdening herself to the one person who seemed to truly get her, without judgment. And in that intimate space, the seed that had been planted began to sprout, its tendrils reaching out, seeking purchase. The therapy sessions, ostensibly for her anxiety, morphed into something else entirely. They became a clandestine rendezvous, a sanctuary where the rules of the outside world ceased to exist. They discussed art, philosophy, dreams, or topics far beyond the scope of a typical therapy session. He started sharing snippets of his own life, carefully chosen anecdotes that made him seem more human, more vulnerable. He spoke of the solitude of his profession, the burden of carrying others' pain, and in those moments, Sarah felt a surge of protectiveness, a desire to ease his own unspoken burdens. The roles were blurring, intertwining. He was her therapist, yes, the one she paid to heal her, but he was also becoming her confidant, her intellectual equal, the only one who truly saw her. One evening, after a particularly intense session, Sarah found herself lingering in the waiting room. The receptionist had already left. Dr. Thorne emerged from his office, his eyes meeting hers with an unspoken question. He didn't say anything, just stood there, the silence stretching between them, pregnant with unspoken desires. And then he walked toward her, slowly, deliberately. He stopped inches away, his gaze holding hers. She felt a magnetic pull, a dizzying sense of inevitability. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. And then he leaned in, his lips finding hers in a soft, tentative kiss. It was hesitant, full of unspoken longing, and utterly shattering. In that moment, the world outside that office ceased to exist. The professional boundaries didn't just crack. They shattered into a million irreparable pieces. This was it, the precipice, the point of no return. And Sarah, despite the screaming alarm bells in her mind, found herself stepping willingly into the abyss. This kiss wasn't just a physical act. It was a silent vow, a dangerous promise, and the beginning of a secret so profound, it would consume them both. The first touch was a whisper, the first kiss a thunderclap in the quiet confines of Sarah's world. From that moment, the sterile office of Dr. Elias Thorne transformed into a clandestine chapel, a sanctuary where forbidden passions were consecrated not by sacred vows, but by stolen glances and hushed confessions. The lines blurred, then vanished entirely, replaced by a tangled web of emotion that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Sarah found herself caught in a whirlwind, swept away by a force she neither understood nor wished to resist. Dr. Thorne, her therapist, had become her secret lover, and with each stolen moment, the stakes climbed higher, the air grew thinner. Their affair was a fragile, exquisite thing, born of shared vulnerability and the desperate need for connection. Elias, stripped of his professional facade, revealed a side of himself Sarah had only glimpsed. A man burdened by an invisible weight, haunted by a past he rarely spoke of, yet hinted at with melancholic eyes. He was no longer just the insightful healer. He was a man capable of profound tenderness, a man who saw past her carefully constructed exterior and into the raw, pulsating heart of her desires. He spoke of longing, of a deep-seated loneliness that mirrored her own, a loneliness that professional success could never truly fill. He made her feel, for the first time in years, truly seen, truly desired, not as a wife or a mother, but as Sarah, a woman with her own complex landscape of needs and dreams. Their encounters became more frequent, pushing the boundaries of their established routine. Therapy sessions would still begin, but the pretense would quickly drop. The couch where Sarah once poured out her anxieties now became a shared space of intimate whispers. They would meet in hidden cafes across town, their faces partially obscured by large sunglasses, their conversations a careful dance around their dangerous secret. Every text message, every fleeting glance in public, was charged with a thrilling, terrifying electricity. The constant threat of exposure was a perverse kind of aphrodisiac, sharpening their senses, making every stolen touch feel infinitely more precious. But the thrill was always shadowed by a gnawing fear. Sarah's life outside their secret bubble was a tightly woven tapestry of responsibilities. Her husband, Michael, was a good man, steady and reliable, if a little predictable. Her children were the center of her universe. The thought of their world shattering, of the devastating ripple effect of her actions, was a constant, icy grip on her heart. She lived in a perpetual state of heightened awareness, dissecting every word, every gesture, searching for signs of suspicion. A late-night call from a friend asking about her therapy, a casual comment from Michael about her improved mood. Each sent a jolt of panic through her. Elias, too, bore the weight of their secret. His reputation, his career, his entire professional life hung precariously in the balance. He spoke less about his fears, but Sarah could see the strain in the tight line of his jaw, the subtle tremor in his hands when he poured them coffee. He had a practice built on trust, a reputation as an ethical and compassionate healer. To compromise that, to destroy the very foundation of his life's work, was an unthinkable risk. Yet he continued. He seemed as unable to break free from this dangerous enchantment as she was. Perhaps more so, Sarah began to notice a shift in his demeanor outside their private moments. He was more withdrawn, more prone to sudden silences, a haunted quality in his eyes that deepened with each passing week. The first true crack in their carefully constructed facade came subtly, almost innocuously. Sarah had been feeling an acute sense of guilt, the weight of her deception pressing down on her. She confessed to Elias, not in the sterile language of a patient seeking guidance, but in the raw, unadorned plea of a lover seeking absolution. She spoke of her children, their innocence, the sheer brutality of potentially destroying their sense of security. Elias listened, his face unreadable. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her in a possessive embrace, and whispered, "We'll be careful. We'll make it work. We have to." His words, meant to soothe, sent a chill down her spine. The "we" felt less like a shared struggle and more like a binding, inescapable fate. He was not just her lover, he was her therapist still. And that duality, the simultaneous roles of healer and accomplice, was becoming increasingly unsettling. Then, a new patient arrived at Elias's practice, a woman named Clara Jensen. Clara was a local journalist, known for her sharp investigative instincts and her relentless pursuit of a story. She came to Elias seeking help for anxiety, a seemingly routine case. But Sarah, who occasionally helped out with some light administrative tasks for Elias's practice, a convenient cover for their clandestine meetings, overheard a few snippets of Clara's conversations. Clara mentioned being interested in ethical breaches within the mental health community. She spoke about a past case she had covered, involving a therapist who had exploited a vulnerable patient. Sarah's blood ran cold. Was it just a coincidence? Or was Clara, with her keen journalistic nose, sniffing around something closer to home? The anxiety became unbearable. Sarah started canceling sessions, inventing excuses to Elias, not because she wanted to end things, but because the risk felt too immense. Elias, however, became agitated. He called her relentlessly, his voice tinged with a desperation she hadn't heard before. "You can't just stop, Sarah," he'd insist. "We're in this together. We can't afford to be careless now." His words, once comforting, now felt like shackles. His possessiveness, once flattering, now felt like a cage. She began to see a different side of him, a flicker of something she hadn't noticed before, a control, a subtle manipulation that had been masked by his gentle demeanor. Was he truly in love, or was he simply afraid of losing control? The unease deepened when she stumbled upon a forgotten ledger in Elias's private office, tucked away behind a stack of old journals. It wasn't his standard patient ledger. This was a separate, hand-bound book, filled with meticulously recorded dates, names, and what appeared to be significant financial transactions. The names weren't familiar to her as current patients. They were a mix of past clients, and some individuals she didn't recognize at all. And the transactions were far too large for typical therapy fees. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What was this? What other secrets was Elias keeping? The picture of the empathetic, burdened therapist began to crack, revealing a shadowy figure she didn't recognize. The confrontation, when it finally came, was muted, yet devastating. Sarah, armed with her newfound dread, confronted Elias about the ledger. He reacted with a chilling calm, a practiced ease that made her stomach churn. He dismissed it as old business, investments, confidential client matters. But his eyes, those intelligent blue eyes, held a warning. A subtle shift in his posture, a barely perceptible tightening of his grip on her arm, conveyed a message far clearer than his words. This was a secret she was not meant to uncover. The thrill of the forbidden had curdled into a bitter taste of fear. Sarah was no longer just his lover. She was now entangled in something far more dangerous, a web woven not just of passion, but of secrets and potentially of crimes. The thread had unraveled, and Sarah found herself dangling precariously, wondering if she would fall, or if she would be pulled deeper into the darkness. The stakes had never been higher. The ledger became a ghost, haunting Sarah's every waking moment. It was a tangible piece of evidence that the man she had allowed to penetrate her deepest vulnerabilities, the man who had promised solace and understanding, was not who he seemed. The initial shock slowly gave way to a cold, creeping dread. What was Elias truly involved in? The casual dismissal, the subtle shift in his eyes, the almost imperceptible tightening of his grip. These were not the reactions of an innocent man. They were the calculated responses of someone with something significant to hide, something far darker than a forbidden affair. Sarah's desperate quest for answers began discreetly. She started searching online, cross-referencing names from the ledger with news articles, public records, anything that could shed light on Elias's shadowy investments. The internet, a vast ocean of information, slowly began to yield disturbing fragments. One name, a wealthy local businessman, had recently been involved in a contentious divorce, losing a significant portion of his fortune. Another, a seemingly reputable doctor, had faced an ethics investigation years ago, narrowly escaping suspension. A third, a prominent socialite, had been plagued by scandalous rumors, and in each instance Elias's name or his practice surfaced in some tangential, unsettling way. The threads were faint, almost invisible, but they were there, forming a disturbing pattern that pointed to manipulation, coercion, or perhaps even blackmail. The weight of this realization was crushing. Sarah, who had sought therapy to find her own lost self, had instead stumbled into a labyrinth of deceit. Her love for Elias, once a fiery passion, began to curdle into a bitter mixture of fear and disgust. She saw him now through a shattered mirror, the reflection distorted, fragmented, revealing the true monster lurking beneath the charismatic facade. He was not her savior. He was her captor. He hadn't healed her. He had ensnared her. The escalating tension reached a fever pitch with the relentless presence of Clara Jensen, the investigative journalist. Clara, unbeknownst to Sarah, had been tracking Elias for months, following a tip about his unusual financial activities and the suspicious outcomes of some of his former high-profile patients. She had begun to suspect that Elias was not merely a therapist but a puppet master, subtly influencing his clients, extracting sensitive information, and then leveraging it for his own dark purposes. Clara's initial visits to Elias's office for therapy were a carefully constructed ruse, a reconnaissance mission. She had already gathered circumstantial evidence, but she needed a definitive link, a witness, someone who could confirm her darkest suspicions. And Sarah, Elias's secret lover, was unknowingly sitting on a goldmine of information. One afternoon, as Sarah was leaving Elias's office, feeling particularly trapped and desperate, Clara approached her in the parking lot. Clara's eyes, sharp and unwavering, met Sarah's. "Ms. Miller," Clara asked, her voice calm but penetrating. "My name is Clara Jensen. I'm a journalist. I'm investigating Dr. Thorne, and I believe you might have some information that could help me." Sarah's blood ran cold. This was it, the moment she had dreaded. Panic surged, followed by a flicker of rebellious hope. This could be her escape. The confrontation with Clara was agonizing. Sarah, caught between loyalty to her children and the terrifying grip of Elias's secret, found herself in an impossible bind. Clara presented her with irrefutable evidence. A meticulously compiled dossier of Elias's financial anomalies, testimonies from disgruntled former associates, and even a veiled threat from a powerful client who had fallen prey to his schemes. The sheer scale of Elias's deception, his intricate web of manipulation, was breathtaking in its audacity. He wasn't just leveraging patients' secrets. He was actively orchestrating their lives, pushing them into financial ruin, or subtly influencing their decisions for his own gain. He was a predator, using the sanctity of the therapist-patient relationship as his hunting ground. The final straw came when Clara showed Sarah a photograph. It was an old, faded picture of Elias, much younger, standing beside a woman with strikingly similar features to Sarah. The caption on the back, handwritten in a shaky script, read, "Elias and Lily, 1998. Clara then explained the true, horrifying secret that lay at the heart of Elias's actions. Lily was Elias's younger sister, a brilliant, sensitive artist who had struggled with severe anxiety and depression. She had been under the care of a well-respected therapist, a man who, unbeknownst to the family, had been subtly manipulating her, pushing her to make reckless financial decisions, and eventually driving her to a tragic, isolated suicide. Elias, then a struggling psychology student, had discovered the truth after her death, meticulously piecing together the therapist's insidious scheme. He had sworn vengeance, vowing to expose and destroy every corrupt practitioner who dared to exploit the vulnerable. But somewhere along the way, his noble quest had twisted, corrupted by the very power he sought to dismantle. He had become the very thing he despised, a master manipulator, exploiting others not just for justice, but for control and ultimately, for profit, recreating the scenario of his sister's destruction in a perverse, distorted homage. This was the ultimate betrayal. Elias hadn't just used Sarah's vulnerability. He had seen her as a surrogate for his lost sister, a twisted vehicle for his ongoing, self-serving quest for vengeance. He was not healing her. He was reenacting his trauma, with her as the unsuspecting pawn. The mirror didn't just shatter. It exploded, revealing the full, grotesque truth. Sarah was not just a patient, not just a lover. She was a victim, caught in a generational cycle of abuse and manipulation. The climax was swift and brutal. Armed with Clara's evidence and her own searing rage, Sarah confronted Elias one last time, not in his office, but in a neutral, public place or a quiet park bench by a weeping willow, the same place where they had shared their first stolen kiss outside the confines of his office. She laid out the truth, her voice trembling not with fear, but with righteous fury. She spoke of Lily, of the ledger, of his calculated manipulations. Elias, for the first time, lost his composure. His face, usually so composed, contorted with a mixture of shock, anger, and a flicker of something akin to despair. He tried to deny it, to rationalize, to gaslight her, but his words rang hollow against the weight of her evidence. He lunged for her, not in violence, but in a desperate attempt to silence her, to regain control. But Sarah was ready. She had sent a coded message to Clara just before the meeting, a distress signal. Suddenly, two plainclothes detectives, discreetly summoned by Clara, emerged from the trees. Elias was apprehended, his struggle brief and futile. As he was led away, His eyes met Sarah's, not with anger, but with a profound, terrifying emptiness, a reflection of the abyss he had created within himself. The secret was out. The mirror was shattered beyond repair. But Sarah was free, albeit scarred, standing amidst the ruins of a life she barely recognized, ready to pick up the pieces and face the arduous journey of rebuilding her own identity, this time on solid ground. The silence that followed Elias's apprehension was deafening, a stark contrast to the tumultuous emotional storm that had raged within Sarah for months. The park, once a symbol of stolen moments and dangerous intimacy, now felt cold, almost alien. She watched as Elias was led away, his figure diminishing until he was swallowed by the approaching patrol car. There was no triumph, no surge of relief, only a profound, aching hollowness. The secret was out, yes, but the wound it left behind was deep, festering. The aftermath was a blur of police statements, legal consultations, and the slow, painful unraveling of her carefully constructed life. Michael, her husband, was understandably devastated. The betrayal cut him to the core, not just the infidelity, but the deception, the sheer audacity of it all. Their conversations were strained, punctuated by long silences and the heavy weight of unspoken accusations. Their children, thankfully, were largely shielded from the ugliness, their parents' hushed tones and strained smiles a distant, confusing hum in their innocent world. Yet, Sarah knew the ripples of this trauma would eventually reach them, in ways she couldn't yet foresee. Clara Jensen, the tenacious journalist, became an unlikely ally. She was instrumental in navigating the legal labyrinth, connecting Sarah with victim support groups, and, crucially, helping her understand the psychological manipulation she had endured. Clara's article, when it finally broke, was a scathing exposé of Elias Thorne, detailing his intricate web of deceit, his exploitation of vulnerable patients, and the tragic backstory of his sister, Lily, that had fueled his twisted vendetta. The article sent shockwaves through the mental health community, prompting widespread calls for stricter ethical oversight and greater accountability. For Sarah, seeing her story in print, raw and unvarnished, was a strange mix of vindication and renewed pain. It was out there, for the world to see, but it was also a permanent mark on her life. The legal proceedings against Elias were slow, grueling. He initially pleaded not guilty, attempting to discredit Sarah's testimony, painting her as a disgruntled patient with an overactive imagination. But Clara's meticulous evidence, combined with the testimonies of other former patients who bravely came forward after her article was published, painted an undeniable picture of his predatory behavior. The ledger, Sarah's silent terror, became a damning piece of evidence, revealing a systematic pattern of financial exploitation and manipulation. Eventually, faced with overwhelming proof, Elias entered a plea deal, acknowledging his guilt to some of the charges in exchange for a lighter sentence. He was stripped of his license, his career in ruins, his name synonymous with ethical transgression. He vanished from the public eye, a disgraced figure, leaving behind a trail of broken trust and shattered lives. For Sarah, the journey of healing was a long, arduous one. The shame was a heavy cloak she struggled to shed. She sought new therapy, this time with a woman, Dr. Evelyn Reed, who was a beacon of ethical practice and compassionate understanding. Dr. Reed helped Sarah dismantle the layers of psychological conditioning Elias had imposed, helping her reclaim her voice, her autonomy, her sense of self. It was a slow, painful process of rediscovery, of understanding that the vulnerability that had made her susceptible to Elias's manipulations was also her strength, her capacity for deep connection. Her marriage to Michael, though strained, endured. They sought couples counseling, working through the layers of mistrust and hurt. It wasn't easy. There were days when the chasm between them felt insurmountable, days when the ghost of Elias Thorne seemed to hover in their living room. But Michael, despite his pain, recognized Sarah's torment, the fact that she too had been a victim. He chose to fight for their family, for the love they once shared, believing in the possibility of rebuilding. It was a testament to his resilience, and to Sarah's unwavering commitment to making amends, to finding a way back to a life of honesty and integrity. Years passed. The The scars remained, faint but palpable, reminders of the darkness she had traversed. Sarah found a new purpose, volunteering at a local women's shelter, offering support and guidance to others who had experienced various forms of abuse and manipulation. She spoke about her experience, cautiously at first, then with increasing confidence, sharing her story not as a cautionary tale, but as a testament to the power of resilience, of finding your voice even after it has been silenced. She understood now that true healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about integrating it, learning from it, and using it as a catalyst for growth. The story of Sarah and Dr. Elias Thorne is a stark reminder of how deeply twisted the lines of trust can become, and how quickly a sanctuary can transform into a gilded cage. It's a chilling testament to the unseen battles fought within the human heart, and the devastating consequences when boundaries are not just crossed, but obliterated. Sarah's journey out of that abyss, scarred yet stronger, reminds us of the profound resilience of the human spirit. If this story, with its haunting secrets and powerful revelations, resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video. Your support helps us bring more untold stories to light. And to ensure you don't miss a single one of our deep dives into the complexities of human nature, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications by hitting that bell icon. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What part of Sarah's ordeal surprised you the most? We appreciate you watching, and we'll see you in the next story.